My name is Lisa, 35 years old, and on Thanksgiving Day, I showed up at my parents' house without warning. I thought they'd be surprised and happy to see me, but when I reached the gate, I found my son shivering outside in 15-degree weather, wearing only a short-sleeved shirt and shorts. Inside, the whole family was feasting on hot turkey and dancing to cheerful holiday music. Furious at the betrayal, I said something that made them freeze in shock. Before I tell you the whole truth, let me know where you're watching this from. And if you've ever witnessed something like this, please hit subscribe to the channel and share this story so more people will know silence is never the right choice. This Thanksgiving, after 8 years living in Paris, I quietly took a flight back to Cincinnati without telling anyone. In the taxi cutting through snow-covered roads, I received congratulatory messages from colleagues. The branch I'd been leading had grown from 3 to over 100 employees. I should have felt proud, but all I could think about was Ethan, my 10-year-old son whom I'd sent to live with my parents 8 years ago after divorcing my alcoholic husband. I remembered the day I sent Ethan off at the airport, how he clutched his worn-out teddy bear eyes red while I tried to hold back tears to appear strong, only to end up crying nonstop during the flight to France. In the years since, I've only seen my son through a phone screen through a handful of short text messages. My mother always said, "Family is everything," and I believed her when I entrusted Ethan to their care. But an uneasy feeling drove me back this time, especially after no one picked up the phone when I called on Thanksgiving night. I sat curled up in the taxi, trying to calm myself with familiar French jazz tunes. In my suitcase was a Lego spaceship set and a few superhero comics Ethan loved. I thought at least I could make up for some of the childhood he'd spent without me. The snow was falling thicker. The driver had to slow down. I stopped at a roadside convenience store to buy coffee and some of Ethan's favorite candy. The cashier warned me to be careful. There had already been 3 accidents from the icy roads. It was past 9 p.m. by the time I checked my watch, and my worry deepened. In my head, replayed last week's video call. Ethan told me he had slightly burned the turkey while helping Grandma and Grandpa got angry. Back then, I thought it was nothing. But now, everything felt suspicious. Finally, I reached the neighborhood where my parents lived. The house appeared with its warm yellow lights, kitchen smoke, drifting up scented with holiday food, and bright festive decorations. I pictured Ethan laughing at the table, and my heart softened. But when I stepped out of the car, I froze. Ethan was sitting curled up on the porch in 15-degree Fahrenheit cold. No coat arms wrapped tightly around himself, lips, purple shivering too hard to speak. I ran to him, wrapped him in my coat, my voice breaking. "Why are you here?" Ethan whispered. Grandpa locked the door. He wouldn't let me in because I burned the turkey. He had been sitting there since 3 p.m., over 6 hours in the freezing snow. I turned and looked through the dining room window. My parents and the family were inside, laughing holiday music playing steadily, a perfect contrast to my son freezing at the door. I felt Ethan's breath weakening on my shoulder, and in that moment, rage burned through me like fire. I knew I couldn't stay silent. I had to act, right now. I brought Ethan back into the taxi where the warmth began to bring a hint of pink back to his cheeks, though his hands were still frozen stiff. I wrapped an extra wool scarf around his neck, looking into his red-rimmed eyes. Eyes not only from the cold, but from humiliation, fear, and perhaps even a flicker of doubt. Was his mother really here for him? I held his hand, squeezing it gently. "Tell me everything." From the start, Ethan lowered his head, his voice small, nearly swallowed by the wind hissing outside the window. He said Grandpa had gotten very angry, seeing the turkey slightly burned on the outside skin, even though it was an accident. Grandpa slammed the table, called Ethan useless, then barked, "Go outside and think about your behavior." When Ethan apologized and begged to come back in, because it was cold, Grandpa only said discipline must be remembered for life. Ethan had sat outside since 3 p.m., 6 hours in the freezing cold. No coat, no water, no one checking on him. I swallowed hard as I listened, but Ethan wasn't done. He pulled out from his backpack a small old leather-bound notebook, his fault book, as he called it, in wobbly, childish pencil handwriting. 11:10, forgot to turn off the light, no dinner. 11:18, spilled water, locked out 2 hours. 11:22, talk back hit with wooden ruler. I turned each page, my heart clawed raw. No one had ever told me this. I had been too consumed by numbers, by expansion plans, by endless meetings in Paris, to realize my child was living as though in a prison. I remembered all the times Ethan vaguely mentioned, "Grandpa punishes me when I'm bad," and how stupid of me thought it was just strict discipline. I didn't see, didn't ask, didn't listen. I felt like a traitor to the very child I had given birth to. Ethan looked up, his voice hoarse from the cold. "Mom, are you mad at me?" All I could do was hold him tight. No, I'm mad at myself. I looked out the taxi window, the yellow glow still spilling from the dining room where laughter echoed. I once believed they loved my son as they had promised, but now I knew one thing for sure: love never leaves a child out in the freezing cold, and tonight I would claim justice for him, even if it meant confronting my own parents. I opened the taxi door and stood up. The wind slapped my face, snow covering my shoulders, but my chest burned as if carrying a fire that couldn't be put out. I held Ethan close, striding quickly across the snow-covered stone path, and without knocking, I kicked the front door open. A sharp crash that stunned the dining room. Everyone turned. My father stood pouring wine, my mother smiling as she ladled gravy over turkey, a few relatives chatting around a long, white-clothed table. But all froze when they saw me. Hair-disheveled face, pale breath, ragged arms clutching a shivering child. Ethan burrowed into me. The room went silent for a few seconds. Then my father set down his glass, his voice low and cold. "What do you think you're doing? Breaking into someone's house at night?" I didn't answer, just stood there in the elegant dining room, staring straight into his eyes. "Why did you leave my son outside in the snow for 6 hours?" My mother blinked, still holding the ladle. "It's just a misunderstanding, dear. He wouldn't apologize, so stop." My voice was so hard I didn't recognize it. A 10-year-old child locked outside in 15-degree weather, no coat, no water, no one checking. That's a misunderstanding. Ethan squeezed my hand tighter. His face flushed from fear, but he still trembled and spoke softly enough for everyone to hear. I burned the turkey. Grandpa sent me outside at 3. He said I'm useless." I hadn't wanted to make Ethan speak, but he did, as if he needed to say it himself to survive. The air in the room grew heavy. An aunt coughed softly, avoiding my eyes. My mother stammered, "Ethan is a little sensitive, you know that. Your father just wants to teach him responsibility." I laughed dryly. Teach responsibility by locking him outside, by calling him useless at the dinner table. My father slammed his hand on the table. "He ruined the family's meal. He has to learn a lesson." I pointed at Ethan. His cheeks flushed from the cold hands clutching his old backpack. "This is your lesson. A child shivering outside the window while you eat pumpkin pie and drink wine." My voice rose, but it wasn't rage anymore. It was the raw pain of a mother realizing how deeply her child had been hurt. I looked around, and none of you found anything wrong. None of you. My mother stepped forward, voice lowered as if to soothe Lisa, "You're overreacting. Sit down, have some turkey, then we'll talk." I nodded. "I'll talk. At the police station. If you don't apologize to my son right now, I'll call the police this second, and I'll tell everything." My father stepped toward me, eyes wide. "You have no right. You left him with us for 8 years, then disappeared." I tightened my grip on Ethan. "I have the right, and tonight I will use it." Under the warm yellow light of the feast, my son and I, a mother and a wounded child, stood like strangers in the house once called family. But this time, I didn't back down. I had been silent too long. No one in the dining room spoke another word. The silence stretched as if the very air had frozen like the snow outside. I could feel everyone's eyes on me. Confusion, guilt, but absolutely no one stepping forward. No one laid a hand on my shoulder to say I'm sorry for doing nothing. I turned to Ethan, kneeling to meet his eyes, speaking softly but firmly. "We're going home. Right now." Ethan nodded his eyes, shining with the trust I thought I had lost. My father immediately blocked the doorway. "You have no right to take him. You abandoned him for years. He lives here. This is his home." I squeezed Ethan's hand harder, my other hand reaching into my coat pocket for my phone. "Then call the police. Let them come and hear your grandson tell how he was locked in the garage at night, how he was denied meals for spilling water. And let's see who gets arrested." My mother tugged at my father's sleeve, whispering something I couldn't hear, but she seemed to be trying to stop him from escalating. He stepped back, but his eyes still burned. I carried Ethan up the stairs. My footsteps were heavy, but each step was one out of the darkness. The door to Ethan's room opened. Not a child's room, but a small, cold space with no toys, no drawings, only a single bed pressed against the wall and a flickering yellow ceiling light. In the corner was a backpack, a few clothes folded haphazardly on a shelf, and an old photo with curled edges. Me and Ethan on his 3rd birthday at the park under a cool tree. Me holding him in my arms, both of us smiling brightly. Ethan quietly packed his things, tucking the unopened Lego set I'd brought into his bag. My mother silently followed, standing at the door, her eyes red. She spoke in a low, trembling voice. "Lisa, if you take him away like this, you're destroying the family." I turned and looked straight into her eyes, the woman who once told me family is everything. My voice was no longer angry, but a blade of awakening. Family doesn't leave a child out in the cold. Family doesn't call a child useless. Family doesn't make a child write down his mistakes like a prisoner. She pressed her lips together, lowering her head. I took Ethan's hand, leading him out of the room that had long ceased to be a home. As we walked down the stairs, I didn't look back. The door behind me remained open. Snow drifting over the threshold like a symbol the coldness of this house no longer held us. Outside, snow was still falling, but this time I didn't feel the cold, because I knew I was taking my son away from the place that had hurt him. Forever. Ethan and I stepped out of that house as if emerging from a living nightmare, only this one didn't end with an alarm clock, but with the numbing silence of those who once called themselves family. We got into the taxi, and I took off my gloves, holding Ethan's hand, gently rubbing it as if trying to transfer the warmth of my heart into his. He said nothing, just rested his head on my shoulder. I turned the car heater to its highest setting, wrapped him in my coat. The road back to my apartment was pitch dark, the streetlights barely visible through the thick snow, but something inside me burned bright. I didn't know what the future would bring, whether I could raise my child alone in the U.S. after all these years, but I knew what I was doing was right. When we got home, I opened the door, turned on all the lights and the heater. The faint scent of French coffee lingered in the air. But the apartment was no longer just mine. It was now a home for both of us. I brought Ethan into the bathroom, ran a warm bath, brought him the softest pajamas I owned, and cooked a bowl of hot soup with my own hands. He sipped it quietly, then smiled slightly and said, "Tastes better than Grandma's dinner." I looked at him, a wave of deep gratitude washing over me, just for the fact that he was still here, still whole. Then the doorbell rang. My heart pounded. Outside stood 2 police officers, one male, one female. The woman spoke first, her voice calm. "We received a report from Ethan's grandparents. They claim you've abducted their grandson." I took a deep breath and opened the door wider. "Yes, please come in." Ethan hid behind me, clutching my hand tightly. I sat with them in the living room and explained everything from being Ethan's biological mother to how I picked him up from their front door to the state he was in when I found him no coat. Purple lips trembling in the snow. I showed them the photo I'd taken of him sitting on the steps. I handed them the fault book Ethan carried, each childish line detailing cruel punishments. Didn't do homework, no dinner. Broke a cup, locked in the garage. The female officer looked at me, then at Ethan, and asked gently, "Who do you want to stay with, Ethan?" Without hesitation, he said, "I want to stay with Mom." Why, she asked. Ethan looked up, his eyes shining for the first time in hours. "Because Mom doesn't punish me by leaving me outside. She doesn't call me useless. And she hugs me when I'm cold." His answer left me speechless. The male officer nodded, took notes, asked a few more questions, and had me sign a report. Then, as if justice had finally exhaled, they stood and told me they would file an official investigation into the grandparents' conduct, and Ethan would remain with me for now, based on his wishes and the evidence. When the door closed behind them, I sank to my knees and wrapped Ethan in my arms, crying uncontrollably. My son, the one I thought I had lost, was here safe in my arms, protected by law, surrounded by love. And I swore to myself I will never let go of him again. Not for anything, not ever. The next morning, the first light filtered through the curtains of my small apartment, casting a gentle glow on Ethan's sleeping face beside me. He was curled up in the fleece blanket teddy bear clutched to his chest, occasionally shifting as if still unsure he was truly safe. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, but my heart was heavy. I knew this wasn't over yet. Sure enough, around 10 in the morning, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find my mother, no makeup, no expensive coat, just an older woman with swollen eyes and a drawn face holding a box of cookies, Ethan's favorite since he was little, the same kind I used to eat when I was a child. I said nothing and stepped aside. She looked around the apartment, her eyes stopping on the old backpack, the half-built Lego set, and the gloves I'd left by the heater. She sat on the sofa and said quietly, "Sweetheart, I didn't know things had gone that far." I sat across from her, hands clenched tight. "You didn't know, or you knew, and stayed silent." She lowered her head. I thought your father was just strict, like my father was with me. I thought, without strictness, children would go astray." I looked at her, the anger in me no longer sharp, but weighed down by a quiet grief. "Did you know he made Ethan record his mistakes every day, that he starved him for dropping a bowl, that he left him outside in the snow?" She was silent for a long time before quietly crying. Not loud, not dramatic, just tears rolling down her cheeks. "I knew, but I thought it was just to scare him. I stayed silent too long." Ethan emerged from his room, hair messy, still holding his teddy bear, looking at her with wary eyes. My mother stood, took a trembling step toward him. "Ethan? I'm sorry. I was wrong. I shouldn't have let you suffer like that." Ethan was quiet for a long moment before he asked, voice hoarse, "Why didn't you say anything? Every time he did that, did you see it?" She nodded, tears falling. "I saw, but I was afraid. Afraid he'd get angry, afraid he'd—" Ethan cut her off with a line that made even me stop breathing. "I was more afraid than you." The room went silent. I looked at my son, only 10 years old, yet his voice carried a cold calm no child should ever have. I stood and wrapped my arms around him from behind. "You don't have to forgive right now, and you don't have to forget. I'm here now, and every hurt will be named one by one." My mother broke into sobs, collapsed onto the floor, and said, "Lisa, I was wrong. I couldn't face it. I thought you were exaggerating, but now I see it all. I just want a chance to make things right, even a little." I didn't answer. I knew both my heart and Ethan's needed time, but at least this collapse was real. And from its ruins, maybe something better could grow this time. Under one condition, silence will no longer be allowed. The first morning after the snowstorm, sunlight streamed through the large window, filling the apartment with a rare warmth, not because the weather had changed, but because the atmosphere inside had. Ethan sat curled up on the sofa, focused on piecing together the Lego spaceship I'd brought from France. No more tense doorbells, no more cold stares from Grandpa, no more Grandma's tight-lipped silences. just me and my son wrapped in a strange but welcome peace. I poured hot cocoa into a cup with an astronaut design, a gift I once promised, but never sent while in Paris. Ethan took it and smiled softly. Mom makes better cocoa than Grandma now. The words were light, tinged with sorrow, but I let them pass. They marked a shift, the beginning of him opening up. That afternoon, I took Ethan to the nearby supermarket. He picked out lettuce cookies and a bag of rocket-shaped gummies. I let him decide dinner. Spaghetti and avocado salad. He said, "Can you teach me how to make it?" I laughed. I've never made it perfectly either, but we can learn together. So we did. The noodles were overcooked. The avocado peeled a bit clumsily, but laughter filled our tiny kitchen. Not cautious whispers, but real laughter from a child who finally saw the kitchen as a safe place, not a battlefield. After dinner, I opened my laptop and requested a transfer from the French branch to the U.S. one. I turned down the executive position, asking only for a consulting role, less travel, less stress, so I could stay close to my son. For the first time in 8 years, I didn't feel like I was giving anything up because this was the right choice. When I closed the laptop, Ethan sat beside me and whispered, "I used to think you didn't love me anymore, but now I know I was wrong." I didn't answer. I just pulled him close and kissed his hair. "I'm sorry for ever making you doubt that." That night, Ethan fell asleep early, hugging his teddy bear and the unfinished Lego set. In his sleep, he murmured, "Spaceship Lisa 1." Preparing for launch. I lay in bed, tears in my eyes, but peace in my heart. There's still a long road ahead, much to mend. But for the first time in years, I know I'm walking the right path, not driven by duty or expectations, but by something far simpler, a mother's love for her only child. That evening, after a simple dinner of toast and sunny-side-up eggs, Ethan and I sat side by side on the sofa. An old cartoon played on the TV, but neither of us paid attention. He hugged a sky-blue pillow, his fingers twisting its corner eyes, lost in the snow still falling gently outside. After a long silence, he spoke voice low and even like he was reading aloud a story he'd recited in his mind 100 times. "Do you remember when I called and said, 'I don't want to be here anymore'?" I froze, heart clenched. It was a video call in the middle of my workday. I was at a cafe near the Paris office, getting ready for an investor meeting. I remembered answering quickly. "What's wrong, honey?" "Not feeling good today." And when he didn't answer, I said, "Mom's busy, I'll call back later." Ethan continued. "That day I broke Grandpa's coffee cup, the one he always used in the morning. I apologized. He didn't say anything. He grabbed my arm, opened the garage door, pushed me in, turned off the light. No blanket. Nothing. I sat frozen, every muscle tense. Ethan looked at me, not with blame, not in tears, just the raw truth of a child who had endured too much for too long. "I'm scared of the dark. Did you know that? When I was little, you told me monsters weren't real. But in that darkness, I saw things worse than monsters." I opened my mouth to say something, an apology, an excuse, anything, but closed it again. I understood this wasn't the time to defend myself. It was time to do the hardest thing, stay quiet and listen. Ethan looked down as if ashamed of remembering. "Once I forgot to do my homework." He said, "Only stupid kids forget simple things." I didn't eat dinner that night. I sat in my room, hungry, too scared to come down. Grandma made cookies. They smelled so good, but I didn't dare ask for one. I nodded, tears falling without me noticing. I reached out and gently took his hand. "I didn't know it was that bad, Ethan. I was wrong. I thought sending money calling often was enough, but I wasn't there when you needed me most." Ethan didn't answer. He just squeezed my hand, his first time initiating. "I'm not scared of the dark anymore," he said, "because I know if I call, you'll turn on the light." That simple sentence broke me not from pain, but from the trust that still remained, even after everything I had missed. That night, after Ethan fell asleep, I didn't leave his room. I sat on the floor back against the wall, listening to his steady breathing, the breath of a boy who had survived in silence and now was learning to speak to heal. and I, for the first time, was no longer the mother who ran from guilt. I was the mother facing the past, not to justify, but to help her child be whole again. Everything began to change with an old sketchbook I found in the drawer of my bookshelf where I used to store work documents from my remote days in Paris. Among PowerPoint presentations and strategic branch expansion notes, I found a notebook with a cover printed with a night sky. I handed it to Ethan and said simply, "If you have any spaceship ideas, draw them in here." He took it looking unsure at first, but then sat neatly at the table and began sketching the first lines. From that day on, every morning after a simple breakfast of toast and eggs, Ethan would sit down and draw focused like a true engineer. His early sketches were basic, just a round shape with 2 rocket wings, but soon they became more complex navigation systems, cockpits, even emergency rescue modules. I was amazed by how my son viewed the world not as a child who had just survived trauma, but as someone rebuilding trust through imagination and logic. I enrolled Ethan in the science club at the nearby elementary school. On the first day, he clutched my hand and asked, "Are you sure I should go in there?" I knelt down and smiled, "I'm sure. And if anything feels wrong, I'll be right outside." Ethan nodded and walked in his small frame backpack, almost half his size, but his steps steadier than I had seen in years. An hour later, the activity room doors opened. He ran out, eyes sparkling, holding a flyer for a build-your-own rocket with recycled materials project. "Mom, I want to build a real rocket." His voice rang out innocent and full of life, as if the dust of painful years had just been swept away by one spark of hope. I took him to the craft store where we picked out plastic tubes, tape, foil, and cardboard. In the days that followed, my apartment was filled with paper scraps, glue smells, and the sound of rulers dragging across surfaces. But I didn't mind. Every time Ethan asked me to hold the rocket tube while he glued on the wings, I felt like more than a helping mom, I was part of rebuilding his childhood. One day I asked, "What's the rocket's name?" He didn't take long to answer, "Lisa 1. Love is safe always." I laughed through tears. "When did you come up with that?" I asked. Ethan looked at me calm, as if it was the most obvious thing since the day you picked me up from the snow. That night, as he slept, I stood in his room looking at the model rocket on the shelf. He didn't need to fly into space. He had already made an extraordinary journey from the coldest, darkest part of himself to a place where he could smile and speak his dreams. And I, though I had missed the early years, was now allowed to walk beside him, witnessing every step of that rebirth, every drawing, every laugh, every piece of the rocket being assembled like pieces of his heart slowly coming back together. I realized Ethan had entered a new phase in his healing, not when he finished building his first rocket model, but on a quiet Saturday afternoon when he sat at his desk, writing something intently. I thought he was working on his next science club project, but when I came closer, I saw it was a letter. The handwriting was neat, every first word capitalized. "Dear friend who feels lonely and abandoned." I froze. Ethan continued writing, "I don't know who you are, but I know that feeling when you think no one cares, no one believes you, no one is on your side. I used to think that too, but then my mom came back, and I was wrong. Someone will believe you. Someone will come for you from the dark." I didn't interrupt. I let him finish the letter, seal it in an envelope himself. Then he asked me to send it to the Center for Abused Children we'd learned about through a flyer at school. "I want them to give this to a kid who's going through what I went through." He said, his eyes serious beyond his years. I nodded and promised to mail it. From that day on, Ethan began spending a little time each week writing small notes like that. Sometimes just a scrap of paper saying, "You're not alone." He even suggested we bake cookies to give to the support group after school. One day when we delivered the treats, a younger boy hugged the cookie box and asked, "Did your sister bake these?" Ethan shook his head. "No, my mom did, and I helped. We're a team." I stood behind the activity room door that day watching my son hand out candy explaining how to attach rocket fins with cardboard, and in that moment I no longer saw a child who once shivered alone in the snow. I saw a soul both soft and strong, radiating the light of compassion. One evening, Ethan said to me, "You know, I used to think I was just a troublemaker, a useless brat, like Grandpa said, but now I think I can help people." I held him tightly. Not just, "Can you're already doing it." That night, when I wrote in my journal a new habit Ethan and I had started together, I wrote one line: "Healing isn't just standing back up, it's reaching out to lift others too." Ethan wasn't just recovering, he was building the safe space he once longed for himself and for other children. And I was learning how to be a mother, not just by staying, but by walking beside him through every healing journey with an open heart and a hand always ready to hold. 2 weeks after that first visit, filled with silence and tears, my mother came back, not with cookies or apologies this time, but with a clear request I'd like to see Ethan once a week, just for an hour, at the park or at home if you think that's appropriate. I was silent for a few seconds, not because I needed time to think, but because I was listening to my heart, a heart that had once been hurt by my mother's silence, and now had learned not to say yes, just to please others. I'll ask Ethan. If he agrees, you can see him, but on one condition. I looked her straight in the eye, not with resentment or distance, but with the clarity of a mother who had learned the value of protecting her child through boundaries. No defending Dad. No talking about the past unless Ethan brings it up. And if I ever sense, even unintentionally, that you make him feel the kind of fear he once knew, I'll stop this. My mother nodded. I understand. I don't want to protect anyone anymore, except him. I believed her partially, not fully, but enough to open a small door. That day, Ethan agreed to meet her at the nearby park. He brought his mini rocket model and showed her how to glue the wings at the right angle. My mother didn't understand a thing about model rockets, but she listened, asked questions, and most importantly said nothing that made him look away. That was the first step. At later visits, I stayed nearby, not interfering, but observing closely. I learned how to be a mother who doesn't control but protects, through presence, gentle yet firm. One day, when she offered to buy Ethan a new tablet, he shook his head. "You don't need to buy me anything. Just don't call me annoying like before." My mother was stunned. Then she nodded and said, "I'll remember." After that visit, she and I sat down in a small cafe near the park. She asked, "Do you ever think about going back to France?" I sipped my tea, looking out at the street covered in fallen yellow leaves. No, there's a career there. But here I have my son, and this time I'm choosing to stay. She nodded, eyes slightly wet. "I hope one day you'll forgive me." I didn't answer. Forgiveness, I knew, isn't a nod. It's a process long, slow, and only possible once the wound stops bleeding. But I was walking that path, and I knew I had changed. I was no longer the daughter seeking her mother's approval. I was a mother placing her son above all emotions, all desires, even reconciliation. Family now wasn't a closed circle of shared blood, but an open network where love isn't born from duty, but chosen again and again. And I had made my choice. Ethan was the center. Everyone else could stay only if they no longer caused him pain. At the end of March, my inbox lit up with a familiar subject line, "Reposition Proposal, Paris HQ." I opened the email not with the flutter of excitement I used to feel in past years, but with the calm of someone who had already weathered the storm. The executive board in Paris informed me that the position of Strategic Development Director, one of the highest-ranking roles, was now open, and they wanted me back because no one understands this branch like you do. The salary was triple what I currently earned. The new office was right near the Eiffel Tower, full relocation support included. In the past, I would have read that email 10 times, weighed every clause, and imagined the press conference upon my heroic return. But now I simply looked over at Ethan, my son, sitting at the dining table, quietly coloring a new rocket design, his dimple showing, as he smiled at a sudden idea. I thought about our evenings baking cookies, his stories from science club, the letters he writes to children who've endured what he has. I thought about the morning he said, "Mom, here, I sleep without dreaming the door is locked." And so I typed my reply, just a few lines. "Thank you for the offer, but at this time my top priority is my son and our new life in Cincinnati. I must decline. Sent." It felt as freeing as dropping a stone I'd been clenching for years. That night, as we peeled apples together in the kitchen, I said to Ethan I turned down going back to France. He looked up a little surprised. "Because of me?" he asked. "No," I smiled, "because I chose what's right. And that is you." He didn't say anything, but nodded as if his heart had just heard what it had long waited for. In the days that followed, we began planning for summer, tending a small garden on the balcony, writing a mother-son journal, and organizing a rocket model exhibit at the community library. Ethan suggested naming the exhibit the Lisa 1 Journey from Ice to Sky. I was amazed. "When did you think of that name? Since you wrapped your coat around me in the snow," he said as he carefully pressed silver foil onto his model. In that moment, I knew I had made the right decision. Not right by societal standards, not by measures of success or international pay scales, but right as a mother, right by my own heart. From now on, our life would no longer revolve around business trips, late meetings, or KPIs. It would revolve around baking cookies, scribbled drawings, whispered bedtime stories, and the stars Ethan wanted to name. Family, I realized, was never about where we are born. It is where we are allowed to choose. And I have chosen. I choose to stay. April passed with gentle spring rains and laughter echoing through our little Cincinnati apartment, once a quiet space for a woman living alone, now a full world for a mother and her son. No more frantic alarms at dawn, instead the clinking of ceramic mugs as we made breakfast together, toast, sunny-side-up eggs, and hot cocoa in a rocket-shaped mug that Ethan had specially set aside for me. Some mornings he taped handwritten menus to the fridge. Today, Chef Lisa's sandwich. Soft-boiled egg and extra love. I smiled and took pictures, not to post online, but to keep the missing pieces of our once fractured childhood. We went to the park together, rode bikes around the lake, and I taught Ethan how to fly a kite, even though I must admit he did it much better than I ever could. Once he fell hard trying to make a sharp turn on the grass, and I rushed over in panic. But Ethan just burst out laughing. "I'm okay, Mom. You're the best coach ever." That sentence 8 years ago might have been just flattery. But now, for us, it was proof. Amidst the shattered past, there was space for laughter and trust. At night, we watched old cartoons, shared popcorn in a plastic bowl, and left the nightlight dimly on. Ethan rested his head on my lap, teddy bear in hand, now named Astro, his partner in dreams. One night, I whispered, "I'm sorry. I wasn't there when you needed me." Ethan didn't answer right away, but after a while he pulled my hand close, buried his face in it, and murmured, "But now you are, and I don't want to be anywhere else." I turned the lamp up a little and looked around, scribbled drawings pinned to the wall, rocket models dangling from strings, a small journal on the desk titled Lisa 1 Logbook. Each page held a memory, a new dish, a funny quote, a rainy day spent curled up reading together. Maybe it wasn't the dazzling childhood of kids with 2 parents. Maybe it wasn't what I used to imagine. But to me, this was a reborn childhood. One not born perfect, but being rewritten with love, line by line. My mother visited every weekend, bringing cookies or fruit, playing board games with Ethan in my presence. She had learned not to interrupt, not to explain the past, but simply to be there, quiet and trying. Ethan called her Grandma again, not because he forgot, but because he forgave. Every time I heard him say that, I knew my son was growing not from anger, but from grace. One afternoon as we planted vegetables on the balcony, a gift from his school's eco club, Ethan asked Mom, Why isn't our house as big as Grandpa's? I paused, wiped my brow, then pointed to the tender green shoots stretching toward the window. Because a home doesn't need to be big, just big enough for two hearts that love each other. Ethan was silent for a few seconds, then nodded like a scientist confirming a universal law. I laughed, knowing he understood. In that small apartment, among the clinking of spoons, the smell of damp soil, and the scent of children's soap, I knew we had started again. Not with money or things, but with time presence, and a love that would never leave a child out in the cold. One quiet weekend morning, just as I was placing a small vase of flowers on the dining table, a knock came at the door. I opened it to find the mail carrier holding a slightly crumpled brown envelope with handwriting so familiar it made me shiver. My father's. I stood frozen for a moment, my fingers trembling as I touched the return address, an anger management therapy center in Cleveland. I didn't open it right away, just set it on the table like something that could catch fire at any second. Ethan came running out, hair-messy hands, still stained with last night's painting. "Mom, what's the letter?" I hesitated, then replied, "It's from Grandpa." His face clouded slightly, a shadow passing over his young features. "Do you need to read it?" I asked. Ethan shook his head but said firmly, "You read it. Then decide." I sat down and carefully opened the envelope. Inside were several pages, the familiar handwriting, more wobbly now. My father wrote that he had been in therapy for 6 months, that he was starting to understand the difference between discipline and harm. He apologized for letting his anger take control, for turning the house into a place of fear. In one part, he wrote, "I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope for a chance to prove I can change before it's too late." I finished reading, hands clenched, heart in turmoil. Part of me wanted to crumple the letter and throw it away for Ethan's memories, for the dark garage nights, for the 15-degree cold on that porch. But another part, small but insistent, wondered, could change be real? Could offering a chance be a way for Ethan to learn forgiveness, not because my father deserved it, but because my son deserved freedom from hate? I placed the letter in a drawer and gave no reply. That evening, as I read to Ethan before bed, he suddenly whispered, "Mom, if Grandpa really changes, I still don't want to see him. Not yet, but maybe one day." I held him close, breathing in the scent of his hair, still faint with children's shampoo, and answered slowly, "You don't have to forgive now, and you don't have to see him until you're ready. We don't open a door just because someone knocks. We open it when we want to." Ethan nodded, then closed his eyes. I sat beside him for a long time, thinking of the letter still in that drawer. The past doesn't vanish with an apology, but I knew that facing it instead of running was also part of healing. The door remains closed, but this time I know it will be me and my son holding the key. No one else. On the day Ethan turned 12, our little apartment overflowed with laughter, the scent of birthday cake and candlelight reflecting off the joyful face of my son. My mother came too, bringing a simple gift, a wooden rocket model she found at a small shop. Ethan received it with a gentle smile, gave her a quick hug, then turned to me and hugged tighter, whispering, "I wish for you to always be happy." I stood still, tears falling not from sadness, but because for the first time I saw a child's birthday wish no longer revolve around escaping the dark, but wishing peace for the mother beside him. That evening, after the guests had gone, Ethan and I sat wrapped in a blanket on the porch, looking up at a sky full of stars. He pointed at a sparkling cluster. I want to name that one Lisa 1, to remember that love is always safe. I laughed through tears and pulled him into my arms. In that moment, I knew I had come full circle, from the woman who once left her son to chase a career to the mother who now turned down success to stay in love, and finally to a woman who understood family isn't where we're born, but where we are chosen each day through love and presence. I had chosen, and Ethan had chosen. We didn't need a big house, a shared last name, or the validation of glamorous parties. We needed hands held tight, a small porch to stargaze from laughter in the kitchen, and the promise never to leave each other in the cold again. That truly is family, not blood, but love, given and given again, steadfastly every day. And now